we're back one more time. Of course, I think the weather's blowing out our antennas here on the tundra. So Andy, again, one more time.
Well, I'm not sure when we lost everybody, but I mean, one of the things is some methodologies have stayed the same, and there's a reason for that, is because we want to have the same type of measurements over time. And so it's when we catch a bear, one of the things we do is we measure how long it is from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. We measure how big they are around the chest, and then we measure the width of their head and the length of their head. We look at their teeth. And so there's some samples we take, like we always take a little tooth. It's a tiny little one right behind the canine. We use dental tools and we just pop it out like a little tiny cork. It's really quite small. And from that, we can find out how old the bear is. Just like a tree, you can section it and you can count the rings on it, and we get that information on those bears. So there's some things that are done the same consistently over time.
Right since the beginning.
Right from the very beginning. And those techniques have been the same. We still use little plastic tags in the ears with a number on them. We still give the bears a tattoo, just like a lot of pedigreed pets have a tattoo in them. In some places they use those little transponder chips that your cat or your dog might have, or your farm animal. So there's some technology that's changed. I mean, those transponder chips are new technology. And so there's some consistencies, and then there are some things that have changed. So our ability to look at different questions has changed a lot. So when we catch bears, we're taking samples of blood, we take a little fat sample, we can take hair samples, and we can analyze a lot of those tissues for lots of different questions. It could be for genetics, it could be for disease exposure, it could be for pollution exposure. Years back, when we started, we had no idea that polar bears had these very high levels of pollution in them. And analytically, we didn't even know how to look for those sorts of things. But now we know that polar bears have thousands of different chemicals in them, depending on where they're from and what part of the Arctic they're living in. Most of those are coming from agricultural or industrial sources very far to the south, but they get into the Arctic and precipitate out. So we couldn't even measure those. We just didn't have the ability in the early days.
So these bears here that we're seeing outside the window have been studied for a very long time. Have there been any trends besides pollutants that we've seen, and what would be the reason?
Well, the number one thing here is the bears are smaller than they used to be. And that we think is because they don't have access to as much food. The other thing that we can see here is that the absolute number of bears in this area has declined. When I started working here 35 plus years ago, we had about 1,200 bears in this area. Now we're down below 800. And predictions going forward are that this population will probably blink out, disappear, probably before mid-century. So there are some challenges going forward, and that's just a habitat loss issue, and that's losing sea ice. And we can see that these bears now spend more time on land every year. The ice breaks up earlier in most years and then forms later. This year is kind of unusual. The bears stayed out very late, and one of the first things we can see, the bears this year are actually better shape than they have been for the last 4 or 5 years. So,
and you saw that while you were doing work this spring?
Yeah, when we were out in Hudson Bay, we could see the bears were doing very well. They stayed a lot closer to this area. Some years, I think when the hunting conditions aren't very good, they go very far out across Hudson Bay. And we can see that because we're following them by satellite tracking those individuals. But this year was quite unusual. So whatever happened, we're not always sure. And that's the problem with a lot of this, is we get little snapshots of insight. So we see how big they are this year, but we might not catch that bear for another 5 or 6 years, and then we see how they're doing, then, and then they might disappear for several years.
So it sounds like bears shrinking was kind of one of the warning signs that maybe bears aren't doing so well. Jeff, are we seeing that in other places in the Arctic?
Sadly, we are, and it's a mixed story for sure. But in places like the Beaufort Sea, where I did most of my work, we've seen a 40% drop in that subpopulation in a similar time frame there, and dramatic sea ice loss. In the Chukchi Sea, the story is a little more uncertain as to what's going on, but we've seen even more rapid and more severe sea ice loss there in the last even 5 years. And so the sense is like Andy was saying, as we lose that habitat, the bears are going to respond, and they're going to respond in a negative way.
So I want to touch on one last little thing here. Megan, I think there's one other thing maybe that has changed over the last several years, and it might be genders out there working in the field. I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Absolutely. It's actually been a wonderful thing for me to witness, both as a scientist and as a parent. When I started my career in this field about 26 years ago, again, all the lead scientists, or the vast majority of the lead scientists, were men. And over the years, you've seen just a real shift in the proportion of women that are students of wildlife biology, in the flexibility of how wildlife science is accomplished. And now I think it's probably more than half wildlife scientists are women, and students as well. And in polar bears, in particular, some of the lead scientists right now, the ones that are doing some of the best work around the Arctic, are women. And that's just been a really nice thing to witness. It's just a really different time, and it's open to anybody who's willing to be committed to becoming a good scientist and to working hard, and there's no place you can't work.
Andy, when you first started doing work there, did you ever think flying in the helicopter with you would be 50% women, 50% men?
You know, I don't think we ever thought about it back then. I mean, it was an interesting time, but it was just sort of the evolution. I mean, we used to talk about wildlife biology being sort of the hook and bullet club. Mm-hmm. You know, you had to be a hunter or a fisherman, and now people come into wildlife ecology mainly because they have a conservation ethic. They're really interested in, you know, trying to make a positive contribution to the way we live on this planet. So a lot of people come into this with a very different perspective now. Bird watchers, hikers, campers, canoers. You know, we still have people that hunt and fish. But I think it's been a really positive change, and it's quite remarkable teaching at the university to see how diverse people are from all sorts of backgrounds, not only gender but also ethnic backgrounds, people coming from all over the world that are trying to make a change in how we live on this planet. So I think it's a great thing. Everybody brings different perspectives to the table and different skill sets, and you know, so I work with people who might have an interest in analytical chemistry and want to work on pollution. Other people that are interested in animal behavior, and some people that are mathematicians, and they can apply their skills to improving our understanding. So I think that diversity is what we need to bring different skills to the questions and challenges that coming generations and our generation are facing with climate change.
Jeff, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, we've seen the same thing in the conservation side. So at Polar Bears International, as an example of that, we have, I think right now, seasonally about 19 staff. Only 5 are guys. So we're in a female-dominated organization, which is great. And we do have a lot of new perspectives. We have a fairly young organization as well, which I think makes us a really vibrant place to work.
Well, unfortunately, we're a little short on time. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties today. But I think one of the things I do want to touch on, just kind of stay with us this week. We're going to be doing other broadcasts this week and next. It is Polar Bear Week as well this week, so visit the Polar Bears International website to see how you can get involved. If you're a teacher or a student, check the Get Involved section of our website. We've got tons of great resources on there. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We do have an evaluation or eval link there on the bottom of the site, on the page here. Please give us your feedback on how we can improve. And thanks everybody for joining us today.